Originally, I was going to avoid making the hammer when building everything else for the Rivet look, and I was really worried the project was just gonna end up so much bigger than I wanted and crazier, and plus I've never made a prop out of EVA foam. My experience has always just incorporated it into costumes. So this whole process is really just me winging it. So I started out with getting a plastic pipe along with a fitting for the bottom of the prop. This is so I could detach it once it was in place and slip a diode attached to a button battery in it. Made a strip from some 2mm foam to cover the top half of the exposed threads. Using 6mm foam, add it to the base of the fitting to widen the piece. And outline the piece and roughed out a circle cutout in the center and carefully cut it out. Used a Dremel to smooth the inside and outer cut areas, then glue it to the bottom. Cleaned it up further to match the strip we added beforehand. Used the circle as a template to cut out a similar size out of some white spongy craft foam. Push it into place. And here you can see how the foam diffuses the light. Took a wood burning tool and carefully smoothed the size. It's not at full heat since I didn't want to burn and leave dark marks. Let's go ahead and glue the strip to the threading. Put another piece above the 6mm strip, this time wrapping it with 2mm EVA foam. Screwed the fitting back on to see how it looks. Using some foam clay to clean up the seams and then put a thin layer over the top portion. Back to the pipe. Realized it should have been a wider piece, so glued an extra piece and just left a gap between the two pieces for a wider effect. I'm then going to put this strip over top that's going to cover the gaps so you don't have to worry about it. Fill the seams with foam clay, then smooth. Now for the grip. Mark the length that I wanted for the handle and wrap the foam around to find the width it needed to be. Once cut, burn the lines down the piece for all the ridge detail and just eyeball the distance, trying to keep them relatively nicely spaced, then glued it onto the pipe. Cleaned up the lines where they may not have lined up exactly and then went through and deepened each one. Dremel the seam down so it's a little bit more smooth and then patch with some foam clay. Time to move up on the handle and add more pieces. Figure out the size I was looking for and cut it at a 45-degree angle for a nice taper. Then cut a piece to overlap and drew out some lines which we're going to tend to in a bit. Also cut the lower strip out and checking it against the handle to see if I like the proportions. Dremel the taper to bring it up more and round the area. Go ahead and glue the pieces in place. Ended up with quite a gap, so just fill it in with some black foam clay. Roll out some clay and create a smoother transition from the top panel to the lower piece. Then I cut these 3 strips out to build the top part of the piece we just created. And to glue them on the edge to widen the area and just apply them one at a time, starting with the 10mm, the 6mm, and then another 10mm strip. Now to figure out the tubes that sit right under the head of the hammer, cut it at a 45-degree angle. And once you decide on the size, cut the excess off. Also at a 45-degree angle, only it's going to be on the opposite side of the original cut, so they can fit into each other when you roll them over. Carefully hot glue them into a tube shape. Hold them in position and mark where they meet the pipe, guessing the curve it will need to be to sit to my liking. Cut out the area and keep checking and adjusting the opening as needed. Once you're happy, Dremel the opening smooth to get rid of any jagged area, and now it's going to sit nice and flush. Glue it into place. For the main part of the hammer, all I had to do was just cut the 45-degree angle on the opposing sides so that I could seam it together. Place it over the handle and guess where the hole placement's going to be. The front part of the weapon is longer than the back. Pipe doesn't go dead center to the body of the hammer. And there's the marking. Go ahead and cut it out. Just place the handle in the opening and used a roll of tape to draft out the holes for the side. Now let's start in the back part. Again, making a tube that fits into the larger one we just made, so that does get trimmed. Once glued, I tried a few variations of a template, and this was the method I ended up landing on. Not the cleanest build I could have done, but whatever gets you there, right? So I cut out these 4 shapes with an angle cut and then lean them towards the center. Apply them along the edge. Then I flipped it over and sketched the top opening. Then add a circle to the center of it and cut it all out. Yeah, okay, it's not the prettiest. So let's Dremel and refine this. Once all the high points are sanded, fill in your gaps and just clean anything up with some foam clay. And so while that's drying, I ended up using this bowl to mark the circles I wanted out of 10mm foam. This is larger than the initial holes that we put in the sides of the hammer. Doodled on a piece of paper to figure out the size of the bracket pieces in the middle of the opening. Cut out what I think will work. This first version proved that it was too tall, so then I trimmed it down until it sat flush with a piece of 10mm foam. Mark and cut the center opening, taking the same size circle but in 6mm. Mark the center, and then from the center circle, create an outer circle from there. This piece is going to go on top, and then everything should sit like so. Let's Dremel and smooth the cutouts. Going to mark where the pieces meet. Since I will have to cut the curve into the back of the bracket pieces, adhere them and cut the excess that continues after the line we just added, and place the wider 6mm ring on top and glued it down with barge. Got some triangle EVA pieces, and these are the same width of the top ring, so I'm just going to cut one side flat and grab that barge again and section by section adhered it to the top ring piece. Took a blade and trimmed the outer area to refine the circle, then Dremel the sides to further refine them. Now to fill in any gaps or seams with the foam clay. For the front, I again sketched out how I wanted to assemble it and made a template for the outer shape. First, we're going to want to cut out that ring for the front of the hammer and Dremel the cuts smooth, and also cut the shapes for around the front. You can see how they lay out. Cut a strip out of 10mm foam for detail around the opening. We're going to leave a gap between that piece and the pieces around it. Before I moved to attach, just wanted to get the sides done. Went ahead and glued them onto the side and cut a piece that will act as the shield piece on top of the hammer. Tapered the rounded end with a Dremel. Line it up where you want it and glue it down. Now to fill those gaps that we have on the top and bottom of these round pieces. Used a piece of paper to trim a template. The top of this template was flat and I did want a rounded shape, so I just created that as I was sketching it on the foam. Then glue it into place like so and just do it 3 more times. Fill in the gaps and seam around the pieces. Now for the front, added the shapes all around and glued it to the main part of the hammer. And here you can see there was a bit of reinforcing done on the back. Cut a strip to adhere to the back. I am missing this footage and I'm not really sure what happened with that. But yeah, it happened. Now for the slanted piece. I just ended up cutting a strip and wrestling with it in sections until it went all the way around. Marked where the indentions go on the sides and the back. Sliced along either side and down the center, then push the shape in. Then cleaned up the edges with the Dremel, fill in the gaps and seams. Once it's all dry, carefully sand it. Drew out the details that needed to be burned, like these mechanical seams, and also burned chips from battle damage. I used a circle bit on the wood burner to add the screws along the edge of the ring. And spray painted everything with the Rustoleum chrome color. Added some Createx Wicked Black into the seam. Painted the grip with the black to help clean up any overspray from the silver, also to better match the black foam and the foam clay on the scene. Put some in the airbrush and paint some dark parts on the handle, still letting the chrome shine through, so it looks more like a dark metal and not just a solid black. Darken between the sections on the top for dimension. The very bottom piece did appear like it was more of a black than a dark metal, so I went in by hand with a brush for a more opaque finish. For the hammer, took translucent blue Createx and airbrushed it to the lip of the side piece, using a piece of paper to limit the overspray. I could have been more diligent in using this paper, but I kind of wanted to speed things up. So any overspray I did have, just clean it up with some cotton swab before it fully sets. Used a paper to protect the front part of the hammer piece. Also stuck a piece in the back under the shield to protect that area. This will save some time not having to clean everything up. After multiple passes, started adding the dark metal sections to the sides and the back portion of the hammer. Also put some shading in the chips, add some depth to the front and also to the brackets on the side pieces. Paint black into the seams and also took an X-Acto to the back of the shield and cut a chip out. The Createx Wicked Silver, add that painted detail on the top of the shield. Lightly roughed it out and then painted the shape. Used a flat brush, the same width of the lines I'm wanting to create. There's also markings on the side, so I just moved these markings into the inner part. Also dab some silver onto the screws. Use a blade to add some scratch details for some more wear. Painted some craft mesh piping red and then used a small piece of foam clay on either side and pushed it onto the table until it dried. Then pull it up, hot glued it. This is the LEDs that I put in the hammer. The center fits right into the pipe. It kind of floats in the middle of the hammer. The very back piece is removable so I can turn the lights on and off. And added some of that spongy white craft foam in the inside of all the openings to diffuse the light. Thank you for hanging out. Be sure to check out the full look if you haven't already. See you next time.